The text for the following video presentation is taken from Entry by Troops, the book of the establisher of the Baha'i faith, which can be read in its entirety at entrybytroops.org.
Once upon a time, not so very long ago, a group of people went against Shoghi Effendi in a very offensive way. They did this for their own aggrandizement and empowerment. But to go against Shoghi Effendi is strictly forbidden by God, as written by Abdu'l-Baha in his will and testament. Whoso rebels against him, Shoghi Effendi, has rebelled against God. Whoso opposeth him has opposed God. Whoso deviates, separates himself, and turns aside from him hath in truth deviated, separated himself, and turned aside from God. May the wrath, the fierce indignation, the vengeance of God rest upon him. Well, Shoghi Effendi, not having a biological son to succeed him, set up a non-biological son successorship in a council in embryonic form that everyone was to turn to upon his passing. This council was an embryonic universal house of justice, which he called the International Baha'i Council. It consisted of two parts, the executive head and the legislative body. This was in conformity with the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which is the charter for the world order of Baha'u'llah. Anything else would not be Baha'u'llah's universal house of justice. Well, Shoghi Effendi placed Abdu'l-Baha's adopted son, Charles Mason Remy, as its president, setting up the executive branch. All of its 9 members were also appointed by Shoghi Effendi and comprised the legislative body. This council was to go through 4 stages to become the universal house of justice. Now, no place in Baha'i scriptures or in any of Shoghi Effendi's writings or discourses are the hands of the cause of God, his appointed assistants, designated to be Shoghi Effendi's successors, nor are they to take over after his passing. In fact, Shoghi Effendi's hands ceased to be hands when he took his last breath. They are to function only under the direction of a living guardian, that is, under the direction of Shoghi Effendi. They claimed the authority that it was them who were to carry out the plans of Shoghi Effendi. Then the defunct hands, they went against Shoghi Effendi. They took over and prevented the Baha'is from turning to Shoghi Effendi's successor, his first International Baha'i Council that he had set up. They set up an administration of their own that is strange to the Baha'i faith, going against each and every one of Shoghi Effendi's writings for the establishment of the universal house of justice. There was not one thing that was spared. A complete violation of everything that Shoghi Effendi had stood for. The first thing they did was bypass the First International Baha'i Council, the successor to Shoghi Effendi, and they scrapped the executive branch, which is an integral part of the Universal House of Justice. There are 2 parts of the UHJ, the executive branch and the legislative body. The legislative body must reinforce the executive must aid and assist the legislative, so that through the close union and harmony of these 2 forces, the foundation of fairness and justice may become firm and strong, that all the regions of the world may become even as paradise itself. The executive is the sacred head and the distinguished member for life of that body. Well, 2 years later, in 1959, when the hands were firmly established in their violation, they dismantled the International Baha'i Council, thus doing away completely with everything that Shoghi Effendi had set up for the establishment of the UHJ. Not only did they go against Shoghi Effendi and God, they were in strict violation of the provisions of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which is part of the covenant of Baha'u'llah, making them covenant breakers of the worst kind. They did away with Shoghi Effendi's plan entirely. Instead, they set up some weird monster, a counterfeit body without a head. The whole Baha'i world should have recognized that this was a violation going against Shoghi Effendi, which was going against God. And it was going against the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, which was covenant breaking. They had the gall to call this headless monster the Universal House of Justice. Shoghi Effendi was infallible, which is why no one was to go against him, whereas the hands were not infallible, but were full of iniquities, and they became the world's greatest enemies of the cause of God. They split the faith, causing a division. They deflected their gross violation from scrutiny and detection of the believers by a switcheroo. labeling as covenant breakers those that didn't go along with their split of going against Shoghi Effendi, causing them that went along with the rot to shun the true Baha'is that were firm in the covenant and loyal to all of Shoghi Effendi's plans and writings. This was a stroke of satanic genius, of reversing the meaning of the will and testament by having the mainstream Baha'is shun the true believers that were firm in the covenant, and to have them embrace those that were in opposition to Shoghi Effendi. Then, to keep the believers from detecting their violating scheme, they shut them out from what they were doing by passing a resolution in their secret conclave, forbidding the Baha'is from discussing amongst themselves the matters, and forbidding them from having any contact with all those dear souls that were awake and firm in the covenant. The reason for this resolution is obvious. It was to keep the rank and file believers ignorant of what was going on by keeping them from asking questions using threats of excommunication. Therefore, they were successful in keeping the believers from becoming cognizant of this terrible violation of the hands. The hands did this to cover up their own violation and to erect a very strong and penetrable wall around their violation to keep the foolish followers, which we call the mainstream Baha'is, from ever learning the truth of the matter. This was carried out with an air of piety, of devotion, and fidelity. These were wolves in sheep's clothing. The establisher of the Baha'i faith has written, "I am not breaking down this solid wall. I can't, but I am going over the wall. As it is said, the true Joseph is like a vine that goes over the wall," in Genesis 49. A minority of the violators, the prophesied 144,000, will turn to the Lamb. Of course, these covenant breakers could not point to one single thing that we, who are under the provisions of the covenant, are guilty of, that could be construed in any way as covenant breaking. So they came up with this ridiculous scenario that we were the covenant breakers because we did not go along with their split, and were thus the cause of disunity. They were using disunity as an excuse to persuade the mainstream Baha'is to shun us. They wanted the entire Baha'i world to be united under their violation of the covenant and to be in opposition of Shoghi Effendi. Thus their clarion cry is that we who are firm in the covenant and obedient to Shoghi Effendi are causing disunity. Didn't Abdu'l-Baha warn about this in his will and testament? "Beware, beware, lest the days after the ascension of Baha'u'llah be repeated, when the center of sedition waxed haughty and rebellious with the divine unity for his excuse, deprived himself and perturbed and poisoned others. There is only one way to have unity in the Baha'i faith, and that is by the covenant. Not only is the covenant of Baha'u'llah, as delineated by Abdu'l-Baha in his will and testament, the basis for unity of the Baha'i faith, it is the basis of Shoghi Effendi's administration. It is the only basis for unity throughout the world. What the hands were establishing was a unity in opposition to Shoghi Effendi. Thus, they were in opposition to both Shoghi Effendi and the covenant. Most people don't go by proofs or by what is right, but instead go with the mainstream, figuring so many people couldn't be wrong. That way, they don't think for themselves, or they don't have to think at all. It is the failure to investigate that keeps people and the religions of the world divided and will cause the great catastrophe. The good news in all this is that Baha'u'llah's Universal House of Justice has been established in the world with the President as the executive head of the body. Go to uhj.net for more information.
The Red Alert. When a believer in Baha'u'llah, whether he was in the faith at the time of Shoghi Effendi or a recent adherent, finds that a person or a group of people have taken over the command of the faith in opposition to an authoritative figure or institution such as the International Baha'i Council set up by Shoghi Effendi, the red flare should shoot up. Or if they should find a person or a group of people going against any of the provisions of the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha, or going against Shoghi Effendi or any of his plans, such as found in his plan of his world crusade for the setting up of the Universal House of Justice in 4 stages, the red flare should shoot up. Or if anyone finds a so-called Universal House of Justice that doesn't have the executive branch, which is an integral part of the Universal House of Justice, as its head, then the red flare should shoot up. Or if you find that all of these violations are present, then there should be a red flame of fire bursting a mile high into the air to jar you out of your lethargy, awakening you to the gravity of this most malignant cancer infecting the body of believers.
This short video presentation may have raised some questions. To have all of your questions answered, go to entrybytroops.org and read the book of the establisher of the Baha'i faith.